For 5 years, they thought he was dead. But when surgeons opened a patient's body, they found his name staring back at them. It was a quiet Thursday morning in Concord, New Hampshire, the kind of morning where nothing remarkable was supposed to happen. The roads were slick with overnight rain, the sun cutting weakly through mist, and somewhere inside a white 2-story house on Belmont Avenue, a man zipped up his black travel bag. Dr. Simon Alcott, 47 years old, senior cardiovascular surgeon at Concord Medical Center, checked his conference notes one last time. His handwriting was neat, almost surgical in its precision. Every bullet point was dated, every reference cross-checked. He was that kind of man, meticulous, predictable, respected. Downstairs, the smell of coffee drifted through the air. His wife, Charlotte Alcott, sat at the kitchen table in her blue scrubs, reading through a patient file while sipping from a chipped mug. Their mornings often looked like this: parallel routines, overlapping silences. 2 doctors in love, bound more by duty than by conversation. "Your flight's in 2 hours, she said without looking up. Simon nodded, slipping his ID badge into the front pocket of his bag. "Chicago isn't far," he replied. "I'll call when I land." He leaned down, kissed her cheek, a soft, automatic gesture, then paused. "You should take some time off, Char. You've been running yourself into the ground." She smiled faintly. "Coming from you, that's rich." He laughed under his breath and walked out into the fading drizzle. That was the last time she saw him. By 3 p.m., his phone went to voicemail. By 8 p.m., his flight to Chicago had departed without him. By midnight, Charlotte was pacing the living room, calling every contact she could think of. Colleagues, police, even airline representatives. The following morning, the rental car company confirmed that Simon's gray Ford Fusion had been logged at a rest stop off the Massachusetts Turnpike, 63 miles from Concord. Security cameras showed him entering the convenience store around 11:27 a.m. He bought coffee and a pack of mints. He looked calm. He never returned to the car. When police arrived, the vehicle was found parked neatly in a corner slot. Inside, nothing. No fingerprints. No luggage. No signs of struggle. The interior had been wiped clean, chemically clean, as if someone had erased him. Charlotte stood beside the police tape that afternoon, her hospital badge still clipped to her coat. She didn't cry. Not there. Doctors are trained to process chaos with composure. But that night, when she returned home and saw his toothbrush still wet by the sink, she broke. For 5 years, Simon Alcott was classified as missing, presumed dead. Grief doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in like fog. In the first year, Charlotte didn't speak of him at all. She threw herself into work. Triple shifts, endless surgeries, the comfort of routine. Every beep of a heart monitor was a distraction from the silence at home. In the second year, his photographs disappeared from the walls. Not because she stopped loving him, but because seeing his face felt like reopening a wound that never closed. By the third, she had stopped hoping for news. Detectives rotated off the case. Leads dried up. Only one box remained. A case file sealed in her closet, labeled in her handwriting. Simon. Inside, his watch, his wallet, a few conference notes, and a letter he never mailed. She read that letter every December, the week of his disappearance. It wasn't romantic. It was practical. He'd written about surgical reforms, research goals, and a postscript that said, "Maybe one day we'll slow down long enough to live." She never did. In 2014, 2 years after his disappearance, a truck driver in Pennsylvania reported seeing a man who looked exactly like Simon at a roadside clinic. Police investigated nothing. In 2015, an anonymous call claimed he had been seen crossing into Mexico with a group of humanitarian doctors. No proof, no trace, just speculation and false hope. Charlotte learned to live with the ache of uncertainty. In her field, anesthesiology, every second mattered. You couldn't afford hesitation. You couldn't afford to think about ghosts. But sometimes, when she adjusted the vaporizer knob on the anesthesia machine, she'd think of Simon's steady hands and wonder if he was still using them somewhere. By October 2017, Charlotte had stopped checking her phone for impossible messages. Her days were quiet now. She taught residents, managed cases, and tried not to look for meaning in the everyday. That changed on a Wednesday morning. She was midway through a delicate pediatric surgery when an administrator burst into the operating theater, breaking every hospital protocol. Her eyes were wide. Her voice trembled. "Dr. Alcott, you need to come with me. It's about your husband." Charlotte froze. Her gloved hands hovered midair. Her mind fractured between disbelief and denial. When she finally removed her gloves and stepped into the hallway, the world tilted. For 5 years, she had built her life on the assumption that Simon was gone. Now, in one sentence, that foundation cracked. In a conference room filled with hospital executives, she was handed a phone. On the line, a detective from San Antonio, Texas. "Dr. Alcott," he said, "I'm afraid this might be difficult to hear." His tone was clinical, too calm for what he was about to say. "A surgeon here performed an emergency operation last night. During the procedure, they discovered an object inside a patient's abdominal cavity. It was sealed, almost surgically. When they removed it and cleaned it, they found a hospital ID card." Charlotte's breath caught. The detective paused, then added, "The ID belonged to your husband." The room went silent. A low hum filled her ears, like static drowning out the world. "That's not possible," she whispered. "He's been missing for 5 years." "I know," the detective replied, "but the card was genuine. It lists his name, photo, and position at Concord Hospital. We've verified the credentials." Her knees weakened. She gripped the table for balance. Some part of her wanted to believe it was a mistake, a coincidence, a forgery. But another part, the quiet, aching part, whispered something she hadn't let herself think in years. Simon's alive. That night, Charlotte boarded a plane to Texas. The hum of the engines drowned out her thoughts, but not her pulse. Every vibration through the seat felt like her heart trying to claw its way out of her chest. She clutched her husband's photo in her hand, the plastic edges digging into her skin. She remembered the way he used to hum softly before surgeries, the way his hands never trembled, even under pressure. The way he said, "In the truth is what the body tells you. Everything else is noise." She whispered the line to herself like a prayer. Outside, the city lights blurred beneath a curtain of clouds. When the plane descended over the endless sprawl of San Antonio, she pressed her forehead against the cold window glass and asked herself the question that had been chasing her since the phone call. If Simon had left something inside another person, what was he trying to say? In a sterile hospital office, she met Dr. Elena Garza, the surgeon who had found the ID card. Elena looked like she hadn't slept in days. Eyes ringed with exhaustion, voice hoarse, but her tone was steady, controlled. "Your husband's ID wasn't accidentally left behind," she said. "It was embedded deliberately, positioned where it wouldn't cause immediate death but would eventually be discovered." Charlotte's stomach turned. "You're saying he meant for us to find it?" Elena nodded. "Yes, whoever did the original surgery knew exactly what they were doing." The precision was unnerving. They both sat in silence. In the background, the rhythmic beep of a heart monitor echoed down the corridor. Life continuing, second by second, as two doctors stared at a single, impossible truth. Charlotte examined the evidence bag. Inside, Simon's hospital ID gleamed under the fluorescent light. The plastic laminate was cracked but intact, the photo unmistakable. His faint smile, his stethoscope, the name Dr. Simon Alcott. Her fingers trembled as she held it. The laminate smelled faintly of antiseptic and something else, metal maybe. There was a faint residue along the edges, tissue or biofilm. It was real. "He's alive," she said softly, not as hope, but as deduction. Elena hesitated. "Maybe. Or at least he was whenever this was done." Charlotte looked up. "Then let's find out when that was." Later that night, Charlotte walked alone through the empty hospital corridor. The polished floor reflected the harsh lights above. In her hand, the evidence bag caught every glint. a ghost of her husband staring back at her from behind plastic. 5 years of silence had turned into one impossible lead. Somewhere out there, a man she buried in her heart was still cutting, still operating, still trying to speak. Not with words, but with a surgeon's language. Incisions, sutures, precision, a message hidden in flesh. And Charlotte, who once promised to read truth from the body, now had to learn how to listen. The sky over San Antonio was heavy with humidity, that kind of heat that clings to skin and smells faintly of salt and metal. Inside the surgical wing, fluorescent lights hummed above stainless steel, cutting through the darkness of a night that had turned into emergency. Dr. Elena Garza stood at the operating table, gloved hands trembling only slightly. Her patient, Victor Ramos, male 22, was fading fast. Heart rate, 110. Blood pressure, plummeting. Temperature, erratic. She had seen infections like this before, but never one that smelled like rot mixed with disinfectant. The odor of something man-made decaying from the inside. The incision was deep. What she found was not. Retractors, she ordered, voice clipped, focused. The nurse complied. Metal clinked. Machines hissed. Beeping escalated into alarm. Garza steadied her breathing. Her eyes narrowed behind the surgical mask. She cut through the fibrotic tissue, dense, yellowed scar bands that resisted every motion. Then her scalpel hit something that did not belong there. It didn't feel organic. Clicked. She frowned and leaned closer. The assistant adjusted the light. There, embedded within the inflamed wall of Victor's stomach, was a rectangular object, sealed by scar tissue. Smooth, rigid, foreign. Not metal, not bone, not anything a human body should be holding. Forceps, she whispered. The nurse's hands trembled as she passed them. Garza began to free the object layer by layer. Her motion slowed to a deliberate crawl. One wrong move and the patient would die. When the obstruction came loose, the operating room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause. She lifted it toward the surgical light. It was plastic, credit card size, familiar blue and white design. Then she saw the photo. A man smiling faintly, blue scrubs, stethoscope. The name printed clearly, Dr. Simon Alcott, Concord Hospital. The ID's edges were slick with blood. Its laminate gleamed under the sterile light. The expiration date read September 2019, 5 years after his disappearance. Garza froze. The world stopped moving. Behind her, the anesthesiologist murmured, "Doctor, his vitals are crashing." She blinked. 2 units of packed red blood cells. Now, as they fought to stabilize Victor Ramos, the ID card lay in a sterile basin beside the tray, a ghost of another surgeon watching from the dead. Dawn broke hours later. Outside, the horizon burned pink and orange over the low skyline of San Antonio. Inside, Garza sat alone in the hospital administration office, the evidence bag sealed before her. She hadn't gone home. She hadn't eaten. All she could see was that smiling face under fluorescent light. Simon Alcott. The name meant nothing to her, but the situation meant everything. A doctor's ID card inside a patient? No accidental retention. No negligence. No surgical logic. This was deliberate. She replayed every moment in the OR, the precision of the scar tissue, the careful placement, the way it had been buried deep enough to avoid detection but shallow enough to eventually surface. Whoever had placed it there wanted it found, just not too soon. She took a breath, stood, and dialed the number for hospital legal counsel. "This needs to go to law enforcement," she said. "Now." By the time Dr. Charlotte Alcott landed in Texas, the sun was an unforgiving white disk over the city. The air smelled like diesel and rain. She hadn't slept since the call. The photo of Simon, that gentle smile, was still burned behind her eyelids. When she entered the hospital lobby, her shoes clicked sharply against polished tile. A nurse at the desk glanced up. "Dr. Alcott? They're expecting you." Her voice trembled. "Where is it?" They led her to a private meeting room. Inside, the ID lay in a clear plastic bag on the table, sealed, tagged, and impossibly familiar. Charlotte reached out as though touching a holy relic. Her fingers hovered just above the bag's surface. It was his handwriting on the back. Tiny initials. S.A. scratched near the barcode. Something only she would recognize. Her throat tightened. "This is real." "Yes," said a deep voice behind her. She turned to see a tall man in a gray suit, Texas Ranger Elias Vance. His face was lined by sun and suspicion. "We verified it," he said. "It's not counterfeit. Cardstock, print age, magnetic strip, all match Concord Hospital's 2012 issue. Your husband's photo. Your husband's ID." Charlotte's voice cracked. "Where did you find it?" Vance nodded toward Garza, who stood quietly by the window. "In the abdomen of a young man named Victor Ramos. Smuggled across the border, dumped at the ER's back entrance. He survived. Barely." Charlotte felt her stomach drop. "And you're sure it wasn't an accident?" Garza shook her head. "This wasn't left behind. It was implanted. Deliberately. Whoever did it was a surgeon. A good one." Charlotte stared at her. "Simon." Vance stepped closer. "You think your husband's alive?" "I know his work," she whispered. "If he wanted to send a message, he'd use the only language he trusted, surgery." Victor Ramos was awake when Charlotte entered the ICU. He looked frail. Dark hair plastered to his forehead, skin pale, eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. Tubes snaked from his arms, machines whispering in rhythm beside him. He flinched when he saw her white coat. "It's okay," Charlotte said softly, pulling up a chair. "I'm not here to hurt you." He didn't answer. His fingers twisted the bedsheet. "My name is Dr. Alcott. You were operated on by someone very important to me." His eyes flicked up, suspicious, fearful. "Important how?" She hesitated. "He's my husband." Victor's breath hitched. "Then you don't want to know what he did." Charlotte's pulse spiked. "Tell me." He shook his head violently. "No. They'll find out. They'll kill me." "Who?" He looked toward the door, voice trembling. "The people who made him do it." Charlotte leaned closer. "Victor, listen to me. You're safe here. The man who operated on you, he was trying to help. That card, it was a message." Victor's eyes welled with tears. "Then you better listen fast. Because that message, it's not finished." Vance stood outside the glass, watching the exchange. He could hear only fragments through the intercom. Panic, urgency, pain. Inside, Charlotte's voice had softened to a whisper. "Victor, where did you meet the doctor?" He shook his head. "I didn't. I was out. I woke up on a table. Bright lights, metal walls, Spanish voices. They said I was lucky. They said they saved me." "Where was this?" He swallowed hard. "Somewhere near the border. Maybe Reynosa. Maybe not. It wasn't a hospital. More like," he searched for the word, "a warehouse." Charlotte's heart pounded. "What did they take from you?" His gaze fell to his abdomen. When he spoke, it was almost inaudible. "My kidney." Silence filled the room. Victor's breath quickened. "They said it was for someone rich, someone sick. But your husband, he didn't want to. They made him. I heard them yelling. Told him if he refused, they'd cut me open anyway." Charlotte's fingers tightened around the armrest. Her mind split between horror and disbelief. "He said one thing," Victor whispered, "just before I blacked out. He said, 'Tell her I found the door.'" Charlotte's chest constricted. "What door?" But Victor's pulse spiked, alarms blaring as he began to shake. Nurses rushed in, pushing Charlotte aside. Vance caught her as she stumbled backward, shock flooding through her veins. "What door?" She kept whispering, over and over, like a prayer no one answered. Hours later, Charlotte sat in the hospital's radiology suite beside Garza. They examined Victor's CT scans, every slice of his abdomen mapped in cold gray. "There," Garza said, pointing to the cross-section. "See that pattern in the scar tissue?" Charlotte squinted. The sutures were perfectly aligned, too symmetrical, too intentional. Every stitch looked like a deliberate marker. It's Morse, she murmured. ... Garza blinked. You think he used sutures to write something? Simon used to teach his interns surgical knot patterns like code. Said if he ever got kidnapped by aliens, he'd leave a trail in his stitches. She traced the line of sutures on the screen, her voice trembling as she translated. D-O-O-R. She stopped. The same word Victor had repeated. Garza exhaled. He left a map inside him. Charlotte nodded. Not a map. A clue. The door, maybe a facility name, a location, a project. Vance entered the room, holding a file. We traced the anesthetic compounds from the tissue sample. 2 stand out, desflurane and rocuronium. Both require government licensing to purchase. Charlotte looked up sharply. That narrows the field. Whoever's doing these surgeries isn't hiding in some back alley. They're running a full-scale operation. Vance nodded grimly. We'll cross-reference suppliers in the region. But there's something else. He placed a printed photo on the table, a shipment manifest from Aegis Global Health, an international humanitarian NGO. The manifest listed hundreds of vials of the same anesthetics, bound for an off-site medical relief center near the border. Charlotte stared at the company logo, a silver caduceus over a globe. Garza frowned. I've seen that logo before. Vance asked, where? Garza pointed to the lanyard in the evidence bag, the one attached to Simon's ID. The same logo. Night had fallen again. The hospital corridors buzzed with quiet exhaustion. Charlotte stood at the window of her hotel room, watching city lights flicker like broken promises. Simon was alive, but he wasn't free. He was working, somewhere in the shadows of a false organization, his brilliance hijacked for profit. Her hands shook as she scrolled through her laptop, researching Aegis Global Health. Every search result glowed with praise. Humanitarian missions, disaster relief, free surgeries for refugees. Every image showed smiling doctors, children in villages, white tents under sunlit skies. It was too perfect. She clicked deeper, opening PDFs of financial reports, medical partnerships, export licenses. Every page lined with medical jargon, anesthesia, perfusion equipment, dialysis circuits, but the numbers didn't add up. They were buying too much, stockpiling far more than any legitimate operation would need. Then she found a shipment record dated August 2017, sent from a warehouse in Reynosa, the same region Victor mentioned. Her stomach dropped. Simon, she whispered, what have they done to you? At 3 a.m., Charlotte knocked on Vance's door. He opened it in his undershirt, hair disheveled but eyes sharp. You should be asleep. I can't, she said. I found where he is. She dropped the printed manifest on the table. Reynosa, warehouse listed under Aegis Global's logistics partner. The same anesthetics, same lot number as the ones found in Victor's tissue. Vance scanned the document. You sure? I'm sure. He exhaled slowly, running a hand over his jaw. This isn't a one-man job. You're talking cross-border jurisdiction, corporate cover, maybe cartel involvement. I don't care, she said. You asked if I think he's alive. I don't think. I know. And if he's still breathing, he's waiting for someone to read his message. She turned toward the door. I'm going to Reynosa. Vance stared at her, the kind of stare reserved for people walking into fire. Then he grabbed his badge, his hat, and his gun. Then you're not going alone. The morning air above Texas shimmered with heat by the time the plane touched down in McAllen, just north of the border. Charlotte sat rigid in her seat, staring through the window at the endless brown fields and rust-red roads that stretched toward Mexico. Ranger Vance sat beside her, a quiet, solid presence. We cross tonight, he said. She nodded, clutching the folder of printouts, Simon's ID photo, the shipment records, the map of Reynosa. Outside, the tarmac radiated heat. The smell of jet fuel and dust filled her lungs. For the first time since the call, reality pressed in. She was leaving the sterile order of hospitals for a place where scalpel work met blood money. By dusk, they were driving south along the Rio Grande. Low warehouses squatted beside dirt roads, their corrugated roofs gleaming under sodium lights. Signs in Spanish marked transport yards and medical supply depots. Vance slowed the car. "Number 43, he muttered, pointing to a building at the end of a gravel lane. The same address from the Aegis manifest. It looked ordinary. A loading dock, 3 trucks, a gate chained but not locked. Yet the air hummed with the smell of ethanol and cold metal, the smell of refrigeration units. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper. "They're keeping organs here." "Maybe," Vance said. "Maybe they're keeping him." They waited until the last truck left, then slipped through the side gate. Inside, the warehouse was dim and humming. Stacks of crates labeled medical equipment lined the aisles. Frost steamed from metal containers. Charlotte opened one. Inside, rows of sealed surgical packs, brand new, sterile, stamped with Concord Hospital inventory codes. Her breath hitched. "These came from my hospital. They're using legitimate supply channels." Vance lifted a crate lid. "And hiding illegal work behind legitimate paperwork." Then they heard it. Faint clinking metal deeper in the hall. Voices. 2 men in scrubs walked past, pushing a covered stretcher. The shape beneath the sheet was unmistakably human. Charlotte's hand gripped Vance's arm. "That's not a delivery." They followed the men through a corridor lit by red emergency bulbs. At the far end stood a steel door with a keypad. Above it, the word puerta, Spanish for door. Charlotte's pulse hammered. He said, "Tell her I found the door." She stepped closer. The keypad was streaked with blood smears turned brown by time. Vance frowned, studying the digits most worn, 1479. "Try his birthday," he said. She keyed it in, April 17th, 70. A green light blinked. The lock released. The corridor beyond plunged downward into darkness. The air changed, cooler, filtered, humming with generators. They descended metal stairs that smelled faintly of disinfectant and decay. When they reached the bottom, Charlotte stopped breathing. Behind a glass observation wall lay a surgical suite, bright, immaculate, eerily silent. Machines lined the walls. In the center, an operating table. And standing beside it, back turned, a man in blue scrubs. He was leaner, his hair gray at the temples, but his hands moved with impossible familiarity. "Simon," she breathed. He froze. Slowly, he turned toward the glass. For a second, disbelief crossed his face. Then something else, fear. He mouthed 2 words, "Run now." An alarm blared. Red lights flashed. Heavy boots thundered above. Vance grabbed her arm. "We've been made." They sprinted back toward the stairwell. Doors slammed shut ahead of them, metal shutters descending from the ceiling. Vance fired once, the ricochet sparking off steel. Charlotte's breath tore from her chest. "He's alive, Vance. He's there. I saw," he growled, yanking open a maintenance hatch. "But if we stay, we'll be joining him." They crawled through the narrow shaft, emerging behind a ventilation fan outside the main compound. Sirens wailed behind them. The warehouse floodlights ignited, sweeping across the yard. They ran into the scrubland beyond the fence until the lights faded into the distance. Only then did Charlotte collapse, shaking, sobbing against the dry earth. Vance crouched beside her. "You saw him. That means we can get him out. But not tonight." She wiped her face with trembling hands. "He told me to run. And we will," Vance said, "until we come back with an army." They hid in a roadside motel outside Far, Texas. The air conditioner rattled. The television flickered with silent news. Charlotte sat on the bed clutching Simon's photo. "He looked terrified," she whispered. "Not like a prisoner. Like a man who's done something unforgivable." Vance cleaned his gun methodically. If he's been working for them 5 years, he's done whatever they told him to survive. Charlotte shook her head. "He wouldn't kill. Not willingly." "Maybe not willingly," Vance said. "But those people don't ask permission." He slid a flash drive across the table. "I copied the camera feed from the hallway before we ran. It'll prove he's alive." Charlotte plugged it into her laptop. The screen showed grainy footage, the operating suite, Simon bending over the table, surgical instruments gleaming. Two men in lab coats watched. From behind the glass, one woman entered the frame, tall, poised, with auburn hair tucked under a surgical cap. Garza's voice echoed in Charlotte's memory. The director of Aegis Global Health is Dr. Evelyn Reed. Charlotte zoomed in. The woman removed her mask. Cold gray eyes, faint smile. That's her, she said. She's the one running him. 2 days later, in a DEA field office in San Antonio, Vance and Charlotte sat before a task force panel. Maps lined the walls, red markers circling warehouses across Texas and northern Mexico. An agent spoke. We've been tracking Aegis Global for months. Humanitarian front, yes, but we couldn't prove organ trafficking. Until now. He clicked the remote. The screen filled with Simon's image from the video. Charlotte's chest tightened. We get him out before they move him again. Not yet, the agent said. We need evidence strong enough to dismantle the entire ring, not just rescue one surgeon. Vance leaned forward. If you wait, he'll vanish again. The agent hesitated. There's a scheduled shipment leaving Reynosa in 3 days. Destination marked as Aegis Medical Outreach, Guadalajara. If we intercept that convoy, we might find him. Charlotte's voice was steel. Then we're going. Night swallowed the border road. A line of trucks rumbled across the highway, their trailers marked with the Aegis emblem. DA vehicles followed at a distance, lights off, engines low. Charlotte sat in the back seat beside Vance, heart hammering. The convoy slowed near a checkpoint Mexican side. Guards waved them through. Vance spoke into his radio. Team 2, move. Black SUVs surged forward, blocking the lead truck. Shouts erupted, headlights flaring. Armed men spilled from the vehicles. A firefight cracked the night wide open. Vance pulled Charlotte down. Stay behind cover. She pressed her hands over her ears as bullets shattered glass. When the noise died, the air reeked of gunpowder and diesel. Agents swarmed the convoy, yanking open trailer doors. Inside the first truck, crates of medical equipment. The second, refrigeration units humming cold. And in the third, surgical tables, 4 poles, and a single operating bed bolted to the floor. But no Simon. Charlotte's stomach turned. He's not here. An agent emerged from the front cab holding a phone. Ma'am, he said, handing it to her. This was on the driver's seat. It was left unlocked. The screen showed one unread message. A number with no name. A single sentence in all caps. Stop looking or you'll get him killed. Back at the safe house, Vance paced the floor while Charlotte stared at the phone. The number traced back to a satellite relay, untraceable. He's alive, she murmured. And they're using him to keep me quiet. Vance sat across from her. Then we make noise so loud they can't hide him. He spread photographs across the table, warehouse schematics, supply routes, names. Every shipment, every facility, every doctor on their payroll. We burn the network piece by piece. Charlotte's eyes hardened. And when it burns, I'll find Simon. Outside, the night wind carried the hum of highway traffic. A low, steady sound like a heartbeat waiting for the next incision. San Antonio Medical Center, 3 days after the failed convoy raid. The ICU smelled of antiseptic and fear. Victor Ramos had survived another brush with death, though his eyes still carried the haunted look of a man half buried. Machines breathed with him in perfect rhythm. The lines of tubing that ran from his arms pulsed like synthetic veins. Charlotte stood beside the bed, hands folded tightly, while Ranger Vance leaned against the wall, silent and watchful. The room was sealed. Only one nurse was allowed in at a time. Victor stirred. His voice was cracked when he spoke. You shouldn't have come back. Charlotte stepped closer. I had to. You said there was more. His pupils dilated. The monitor spiked. They're watching everything, even here. No one's listening now, Vance said quietly. We swept the room. Talk. Victor's throat worked. They call it the sanctuary. That's where your husband is. Charlotte's breath caught. Where is it? Not a place, he whispered, eyes darting toward the ceiling cameras. A name they use for the lower levels. Underground. hidden under the humanitarian hospital in Reynosa. People go in for surgery, and they don't come out. Charlotte noticed it then. A faint discoloration near Victor's collarbone. A scar shaped like a triangle with 3 dots inside. She brushed the area gently with gloved fingers. Who did this? Victor flinched. They mark donors that survive, so they can find us later if we talk. Her stomach twisted. Donors. He gave a hollow laugh. That's what they call us. People they steal from. Not everyone wakes up after the first time. I did. Vance leaned forward. Can you identify anyone who worked there? Faces? Names? Victor closed his eyes, struggling to remember. A woman. Tall. Pale. Red hair. She ran the place. Everyone called her Doctora. Charlotte felt her pulse stop. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Victor nodded faintly. She gave orders to your husband. Victor's voice weakened, but he kept talking, slowly, painfully, as if confessing purged poison. They brought me in at night, blindfolded. When they took it off, I was already on the table. The lights were so bright I couldn't see faces at first. I remember one voice, steady, calm. A man saying, "Hold still, this will save you." That was Simon, Charlotte whispered. He didn't sound cruel, Victor said. He sounded broken, like he'd been forced to do it too many times. He turned his head toward her. He slipped something into me when they weren't looking. The card. He said, "They watch the organs, not the scars. And then they put me under again." Silence filled the room. The ventilator hissed. Charlotte swallowed hard. He risked his life to send that message. Victor looked at her, eyes glassy. Then you better make it worth something. That evening, Charlotte and Dr. Garza stood in the pathology lab examining Victor's post-op scans again. The scar pattern on his abdomen glowed faintly under ultraviolet light, thin lines of bioluminescent dye woven into the sutures. Garza adjusted the filter on the scope. These aren't standard materials. Look at the dispersion under UV. This dye carries trace fluorophores. Charlotte leaned closer. That's lab-grade marker ink. We use it for research microimaging. He embedded data into his stitches. Together they mapped the pattern across the incision line. Letters emerged from the fluorescent glow. S-A-N-C-T-5. Garza blinked. Sanct 5. What does that mean? Charlotte's mind raced. It's not a word. It's an identifier. Level 5. The sanctuary's 5th sublevel. Vance entered, carrying a folder of intercepted communications. We just got confirmation. Aegis filed construction permits 5 years ago for an underground extension to their Reynosa facility. 5 levels deep. Charlotte looked from the scans to the folder. Then that's where he is. The DEA task force refused to authorize another cross-border strike without formal cooperation from Mexican authorities. Red tape, diplomacy, stalling. Charlotte slammed her fist on the table. Every hour you waste, they're cutting another body open. The agent in charge held her gaze. Dr. Alcott, this isn't a crusade. We need evidence that holds in court, not another bloodbath. Vance leaned forward. You want evidence? We'll get it. But if she's right, every organ they move is another murder. The agent sighed. Unofficially, I can't stop you from visiting their corporate office again. But if you cross into Mexico, you're on your own. Charlotte's voice was flat. Then we'll start where the paper trail ends. The headquarters of Aegis Global Health gleamed like honesty itself. Glass facade, brushed steel, smiling receptionists. The world's image of compassion. Charlotte and Vance were ushered into a conference room high above the city. Dr. Evelyn Reed arrived precisely on time, her composure flawless. She wore a charcoal suit, her hair pulled back, her smile calibrated to perfection. Ranger Vance, she said smoothly. Dr. Alcott, I hoped we'd meet under better circumstances. Charlotte's tone was ice. Better circumstances like my husband being enslaved in your operating rooms? Reed's smile didn't falter. You've been misinformed. Dr. Alcott volunteered for our humanitarian program years ago. He chose to stay. That's a lie, Charlotte snapped. He was abducted. Reed folded her hands. Your grief is understandable, but perhaps you should consider that some men prefer purpose to marriage. Vance rose halfway from his seat. Careful, doctor. Reed turned toward him, eyes gleaming. Careful is the only way anyone survives in medicine. Ranger, surely you understand that. Then she stood. If you'll excuse me, I have patients who still believe in what we do. As she left, Charlotte noticed the faint triangular scar at the base of Reed's neck, the same mark Victor bore. Her stomach turned. Back at the hotel, Vance played back the miniature recorder hidden in his jacket during the meeting. Reed's words played clearly, especially one sentence near the end. We operate in places no one looks. He rewound, played it again. The background hum was steady until that line, then a faint mechanical rhythm, 3 beeps repeating every 4 seconds. Charlotte froze. That's a ventilator alarm. From her office? No, from somewhere near her. She's working inside a medical facility even during meetings. She grabbed her laptop, ran the audio through analysis software, isolating the echo pattern. The result displayed a unique frequency map. Garza, joining them via video call, recognized it instantly. That pattern matches the backup alarms for older Stryker ventilators, models used in mobile surgical units. Charlotte leaned forward. Then her office isn't just an office. It's connected to a hidden operating wing. Vance's jaw tightened. And now we know where to look. Before they could act, news came from the ICU. Victor Ramos was gone. The nurse on duty found his bed empty. IVs ripped out, monitor leads trailing blood spots across the floor. Security footage showed 2 men in orderly uniforms wheeling him out through the loading dock at 3:14 a.m. Charlotte watched the video, horror turning to rage. They took him. He was the last witness. Garza whispered over the phone. Maybe not the last. What do you mean? Victor called me before he vanished, Garza said. He said if anything happened, there was something hidden in his hospital locker. Charlotte and Vance drove straight back to San Antonio. The locker was empty except for a folded piece of gauze sealed in a specimen bag. Inside the gauze, a tiny microchip. They inserted it into Charlotte's laptop. A file appeared, a single encrypted video. It opened to grainy footage of a dim surgical room. Simon Alcott stood beside the table, sweat-soaked, exhausted. The camera trembled, Victor's perspective. Simon looked directly into the lens. If you're seeing this, it means I found a way out. Tell Charlotte I didn't stop being a doctor. I just changed what I had to cut. The feed glitched, then ended. Charlotte stared at the screen until tears blurred it into light. He's fighting from inside, she whispered. He's still trying to save people. Vance touched her shoulder. Then we finish what he started. The city of Reynosa slept behind curtains of heat and dust. Neon signs buzzed over cracked sidewalks. Freight trucks rolled through intersections where no one asked questions. From a distance, the Aegis Global Health Compound looked like any other humanitarian hospital. White walls, Blue Cross, banners printed in English and Spanish promising free medical aid. To Charlotte, it looked like a lie built of concrete. She stood beside Ranger Vance and Dr. Garza on a rooftop across the street, binoculars pressed to her eyes. The courtyard below was crowded with people in scrubs. A generator hummed, steady as a heartbeat. Under the building's main structure, a loading ramp slanted downward into shadow. That's the entrance, Vance said. Sanct 5. Level 5. Garza's face was drawn. We need more than guesses. Charlotte lowered the binoculars. We'll get proof. And we'll get him. At dawn, they walked through the front gate dressed as visiting medical volunteers, IDs forged from Aegis' own templates. Vance's badge read Logistics Coordinator. Garza and Charlotte posed as surgical observers from the World Health Mission. The receptionist, a young man with perfect English, smiled too easily. Welcome to Aegis Global Health. Please sign in. Charlotte wrote the name Dr. C. Heart on the line. Her handwriting shook slightly. They were escorted through spotless corridors lined with motivational posters. Healing without borders. Medicine without fear. Everything smelled of antiseptic and manufactured goodness. Nurses passed briskly with clipboards. Somewhere a child laughed. On the surface, it was paradise. But Charlotte noticed what others would not. The surgical schedules were handwritten, not digital. No patient surnames, only initials. Each entry marked by a Roman numeral I through V. 5 levels. She exchanged a glance with Garza. Found it. After lunch, they slipped away from the tour group. Vance led them down a side stairwell into the supply section. Beyond a locked steel door, a narrow elevator shaft waited, unmarked. A keypad glowed beside it. Garza pulled a small UV penlight from her pocket and scanned the keypad. Someone entered for -7-1-9 recently, she murmured. Oils still fresh. Charlotte whispered, Simon's birthday. The door slid open soundlessly. They stepped inside. The air was colder, filtered, carrying that faint metallic scent of stored blood. The elevator sank deep. Level numbers flashed past. 1, 2, 3, 4. Then the display read sank 5. The doors opened. What lay beyond looked nothing like a hospital. A corridor of glass and steel stretched ahead, lined with sealed rooms. Inside each, surgical tables, equipment trays, for poles. Some rooms were dark. Others glowed faintly, monitors still pulsing with data. Charlotte's breath hitched. This is it. The sanctuary. Vance pried open the first door with a multi-tool. Inside, rows of filing cabinets reached the ceiling. Each drawer labeled with country codes. HND, GUA, NIG, IND, VNM. Garza opened one. Inside, patient charts, hundreds. Photographs of donors, consent forms forged with trembling signatures, surgical notes signed with Simon's initials. Charlotte's hands shook as she picked one up. He documented everything. Vance scanned the room quickly. Looks like they recorded the operations too. He opened a cabinet marked media. Dozens of drives labeled with dates. One read, Alcott _2015 trial series. Garza whispered, We have to copy this. Charlotte slipped the drive into her coat pocket. We have to survive long enough to use it. Down the corridor, faint music played from a speaker. A violin piece, soft and mournful. They followed the sound until they reached a set of glass doors labeled Surgical Unit C. Through the window Charlotte saw him. Simon. He stood at an operating table under white light, flanked by masked assistants. His hair was grayer, his face drawn, but his posture was unchanged. Steady, focused, devastatingly calm. She pressed her hand to the glass. Simon. He looked up, as if sensing her presence. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then he turned his head slightly, murmured something to the nurse beside him, and deliberately knocked a tray of instruments to the floor. The crash echoed. Alarms began to sound. Run, Vance hissed, pulling Charlotte back. She resisted. He saw me. He's creating a diversion. Move. They sprinted back toward the elevator. Doors clanged open behind them, guards shouting in Spanish. Bullets sparked off the walls. They dove into the lift, hit up, and the doors sealed just as the first impact hit. The elevator lurched upward, sirens wailing below. Charlotte pressed her forehead against the wall, trembling. He's alive, Vance. He saw me. He's still fighting. The elevator stopped at level 3. The doors opened to chaos. Orderlies running, patients crying, red lights spinning. Vance grabbed Garza's arm. Back exit now. They moved through the surgical wing disguised among panicking staff. Garza slipped their forged IDs into a nurse's pocket. They'll blame the wrong people, she whispered. They burst into the loading bay just as security vehicles pulled into the yard. A refrigerated truck stood idling, its driver gone. Vance threw open the passenger door. Get in. Charlotte climbed up, clutching the stolen drive to her chest. The truck roared out through the gate as gunfire erupted behind them. By the time they reached the outskirts of Reynosa, dawn was bleeding over the horizon. They crossed the border minutes before Mexican police sealed the road. Only then did Charlotte open her hand. She was still holding one of Simon's surgical clamps, slipped to her by a nurse as he'd made his distraction. A tag etched into the handle read simply, C2-9. Garza frowned. Another code? Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. No. Coordinates. Later, at a safe house outside McAllen, Garza entered the numbers into her laptop. C2-9 translated into map coordinates in northern Mexico, an abandoned airstrip near Monterrey. Vance leaned over her shoulder. That's where they fly the organs out. Charlotte's voice was barely audible. And maybe where they'll move him next. She traced the line on the map with a trembling finger. We have to get there before they do. Vance looked at her. If we go, there's no coming back clean. This stops being an investigation. Charlotte met his eyes. It already stopped being one the day they cut into Victor. Garza packed medical gear into a black duffel, antiseptic, tourniquets, morphine vials. If we find him, he'll need care. God knows what they've done to him. Charlotte slipped the data drive into an inner pocket. We expose them, every name, every shipment. No court will bury this. Vance loaded his rifle, chambering around. Then we hit them at the airstrip tonight. Outside, thunder rolled low across the horizon, promising rain. Lightning flashed over the desert. The world felt poised between storm and silence. Charlotte looked out at the gathering clouds and whispered, "Hold on, Simon. We're coming." Night crept over northern Mexico like an old wound reopening. The storm that had brewed all afternoon now rolled in from the Sierra Madre, black clouds swallowing the last of the light. A single dirt road led toward the abandoned airstrip, a scar of concrete and rusted hangars miles from any village. Charlotte sat in the back of the pickup truck beside Garza, rain pelting the windshield, thunder shaking the sky. She could see Vance's silhouette behind the wheel, a shadow outlined by flashes of lightning. "This place," Garza murmured, checking her radio, "looks dead." Vance's voice was low. "Dead things are perfect for hiding the living." Charlotte's hand brushed the inside pocket of her coat. The data drive, Simon's coordinates, the last fragment of his message. "He wanted me to find this place," she whispered. "He wanted it to end here." The hangar loomed ahead, its corrugated walls rattling in the wind. Faded letters still spelled Aeropuerto Monterrey, sir. The floodlights were off, but through the downpour they could see faint movement, figures loading crates into the belly of a twin-engine cargo plane. Vance raised his binoculars. 6 men, maybe more inside. They're packing medical containers. Garza's breath fogged the window. Organ transport coolers. Charlotte's chest tightened. Then Simon's still alive. He's operating for them right now. Vance loaded his rifle. "If he is, we go in quiet, take the plane and get him out." Charlotte caught his wrist. "If we go in shooting, they'll kill him before we reach him." Vance nodded reluctantly. "Then we used the storm for cover." Rain hammered the roof as they crept through the hangar's side entrance. Inside, the air was thick with disinfectant and jet fuel. Electric hums vibrated through the floor, generators, ventilators, refrigeration units. Charlotte's eyes adjusted. The space had been converted into a temporary surgical camp. Folding tables, monitors, bloodlines snaking across the concrete. 2 operating lamps hung from chains. At the center, under a sheet of harsh light, was a man in scrubs. His hands were gloved, his movements slow, deliberate, mechanical. A man performing a task he no longer believed in. "Simon." Charlotte froze. The years had hollowed him, dark circles under his eyes, his hair streaked with gray, but his precision was unchanged. Every movement carried the memory of purpose. Garza's hand tightened on her arm. "He's mid-procedure." A guard stood near the table, watching closely. Reed was there too. Dr. Evelyn Reed, her red hair gleaming under the surgical lights, her face masked but unmistakable. She was supervising, clipboard in hand. "Pressure's dropping," Reed said coolly, glancing at the monitor. "Stabilize him." Simon didn't look up. "He's losing blood because you keep pushing them too fast. This isn't sustainable." Reed tilted her head. "You're not here to lecture ethics, Simon. You're here to finish what you started. I started saving lives, he said through clenched teeth. You turned it into business. Reed smiled faintly. Business keeps people alive. Money buys medicine. And you've saved hundreds of lives for us. You should be proud. Simon's hand shook. Pride died a long time ago. Reed stepped closer, voice low, venom sweet. You think your wife still sees you as a hero? She's been trying to erase your ghost for years. If she finds you now, what will she see? The man who carved out organs for money? Or the man who couldn't stop? Simon froze, scalpel trembling in his hand. Then he whispered, She'll see the man who tried to stop you. And then, for the first time in 5 years, he looked up, straight at Charlotte. Vance moved first, stepping out of the shadows. Hands up, Dr. Reed. The guards spun. Gunfire cracked. Chaos exploded through the hangar. Reed dove behind the operating table. Garza dragged Charlotte to cover, shouting over the roar. Simon shielded his patient with his own body. Don't shoot. There's a man on the table. Vance fired twice, dropping one guard. Move, he yelled. Reed dashed for the far door, clutching a metal case. Simon tore off his gloves, sprinted toward Charlotte as she broke cover. They collided halfway across the room. For a heartbeat, the world vanished. Only their breathing, rain drumming on the roof, the warmth of his face against hers. I thought you were dead, she whispered. I was, he said softly, until I saw you. Then more guards poured in through the side door. Vance yelled, Out! Back to the truck. They ran through the rain-soaked field, lightning flashing behind them. Garza helped Simon limp toward the fence. Behind them, headlights flared, black SUVs roaring to life. Bullets tore through the storm. Charlotte grabbed Simon's hand, pulling him down behind a concrete barrier. We have to move, Simon gasped, blood spreading across his sleeve. It's just my arm. Keep going. Vance turned, firing into the darkness. Go. I'll hold them. No, Charlotte shouted, but he was already running back toward the hangar, disappearing into the storm. Moments later, a deafening explosion split the air. The plane ignited, flames cutting through the rain like daylight. Reed's scream echoed once, then vanished. Vance didn't return. Hours later, in a safe house across the border, Simon lay on a cot as Garza stitched his arm. Charlotte sat beside him, eyes red, hair damp with rain. You should have left me there, he murmured. Never, she said. You're my husband. He stared at the ceiling. Not anymore. They made me do it, Charlotte. I tried to resist, but they had patients, guards, deadlines. If I refused, they'd kill them. I saved what I could. But I couldn't save them all. Charlotte took his hand. You sent me the ID. You found a way to be found. He turned to her, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on his face. I needed you to forgive me before I forgave myself. She shook her head. You don't need forgiveness. You need rest. He gave a weak laugh. No, rest is for the dead. By dawn, the DEA had raided the remnants of Aegis Global's facilities across 3 states. Over 50 arrests, millions in seized assets, hundreds of unregistered surgeries discovered. Dr. Evelyn Reed's body was never recovered. Simon was taken into protective custody. His testimony would dismantle the largest organ trafficking network in North America. Garza watched as they loaded him into the armored vehicle. He'll never be free, will he? She asked quietly. Charlotte looked at her husband through the window. No, she said softly. But at least now he's not alone. Weeks later, back in her home in New Hampshire, Charlotte received a small package without a return address. Inside was a flash drive labeled Read Final. She hesitated, then played it. The screen flickered to life. Evelyn Reed, alive, blood on her face, camera shaking. You think you won, Dr. Alcott, she said, her voice calm despite the chaos behind her. But you've only cut off one head. The network is global. You can't stop a system built on demand. Every time someone buys time for a loved one, another will die to supply it. You saved your husband, but you didn't save the world." The screen went black. Charlotte sat in silence, the rain beginning to fall outside her window, the same rhythm that had followed her since that night. She whispered, "Maybe not, but I saved him." A month later, a nurse at San Antonio Medical Center found an envelope in her locker. Inside, a note in Simon's handwriting. "If you ever find this, tell Charlotte I left her something at Concord Hospital, in or room 7. Under the light panel." Charlotte flew back immediately. The hospital had been remodeled since his disappearance, but room 7 remained untouched, a memorial to the surgeon who had vanished in 2012. She climbed onto the operating table, unscrewed the light panel, and pulled out a small metal capsule. Inside, a folded paper, yellowed with time. It read, "No one can take what is done in love and make it evil forever." Essay. She closed her eyes. The world outside the window glowed with morning light. Somewhere, a heart monitor beeped, a sound of life continuing. For the first time in years, she let herself breathe. Winter dawned gray and soundless over Washington, D.C. A light snow fell over the federal courthouse, pale flakes drifting against steel and glass. Inside, the courtroom was silent except for the soft click of a pen and the distant hum of fluorescent lights. Dr. Simon Alcott sat at the defense table, his once steady surgeon's hands folded together like they were holding something fragile. Beside him sat his attorney, a government-appointed advocate with eyes that had seen too many broken men. At the front, the tribunal of 3 judges, one from the Department of Justice, one from the World Health Commission, and one from the International Medical Ethics Board. Behind them, cameras rolled. The world was watching. Charlotte sat in the front row, pale but composed, her heart steady only because she'd promised him she'd be there. Garza sat beside her, taking quiet notes. The lead judge spoke first. "Dr. Alcott, you are charged with 57 counts of unauthorized surgery, 7 counts of manslaughter, and participation in organized medical trafficking. How do you plead?" Simon's voice was calm, measured, surgical in tone. "Guilty, but not by choice." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised a hand. "Then let's hear your choice." Simon stood, the weight of 5 years pressing against his spine. "I was taken in 2012, he began. "Drugged, transported, and placed in a clinic near the border. I woke up to find my hands already operating on a man I didn't know. They told me if I stopped, they'd replace me with someone who didn't care if the patients lived." He paused, voice trembling slightly. "At first I fought. Then I learned that fighting meant watching people die. So I worked. I kept them alive long enough for them to be sold. And every night I told myself I'd find a way to send a message, until Victor Ramos gave me that chance." Charlotte's eyes glistened. He didn't look at her, he couldn't. Simon continued, his voice lower now. "They called it the sanctuary, but it wasn't one. It was a slaughterhouse disguised as mercy. The patients were prisoners, the surgeons slaves, and every incision was a debt paid to the devil of profit." The prosecutor stepped forward. "And yet you continued for 5 years." Simon nodded. "Because survival isn't heroism. It's guilt stretched over time." A heavy silence filled the room. During recess, Charlotte was called to testify as a character witness. She stepped to the stand, hands steady, voice clear. Dr. Alcott wasn't complicit. He was caged. They took his skill, the very thing that defined him, and turned it into a weapon. If he'd refused, he would have been executed. If he complied, he damned himself. That's not complicity. That's captivity. The prosecutor adjusted his glasses. "Mrs. Alcott, are you suggesting he bears no responsibility?" Charlotte met his gaze. "He bears the kind that never goes away. You can punish him, but you can't make him forget. Every life he couldn't save already sentenced him long before this trial." Garza, seated behind, whispered under her breath, "That's the truth." Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Screens flashed images of Aegis Global's remaining facilities being raided around the world: Berlin, Mumbai, Cape Town. Names of surgeons, CEOs, and financiers scrolled across banners. But not all of them were caught. In Geneva, an anonymous email was sent to a private investor list. The operation continues. New sanctuary, Southeast Asia. Code word, Ascend. Somewhere across the ocean, a plane landed at midnight. Its cargo marked humanitarian aid. The system, as Reed once said, was Hydra-headed. Cut 1, another rose. That night, in his holding cell, Simon requested paper and a pen. The guard hesitated, then obliged. Hours later, Charlotte was escorted in to see him. He handed her a letter folded neatly. "What's this?" she asked. "My statement for the record," he said. "But not for them. For the world." He leaned back against the wall. "I operated on monsters because I thought I could save the innocent trapped among them. But there's no clean hand in a pit of blood. Every surgeon thinks he's God until he realizes he's only rearranging suffering." Charlotte's throat tightened. "You saved people too." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe it balances somewhere in the middle." She touched his cheek. "What will you do when they release you?" Simon's gaze drifted toward the small barred window. "If I'm released, I'll find the others. The ones still captive. Not as a surgeon. As a witness." The final day came with pale winter sunlight. The lead judge spoke quietly, her tone grave. "Dr. Alcott, this court recognizes the circumstances of coercion, but cannot ignore the gravity of your participation. You are hereby sentenced to 15 years confinement in a federal medical correctional facility, with eligibility for parole in 6. You will also serve as consultant and witness in ongoing investigations against Aegis Global Health." Simon nodded once, accepting it without a word. The gavel fell. Charlotte's breath broke softly, but she did not cry. For the first time, she understood that closure wasn't peace. It was survival reshaped into something bearable. After the trial, as Simon was escorted out, a woman brushed past Charlotte in the hallway. She was dressed like any reporter. Dark coat, camera slung across her shoulder. But as she passed, she whispered, barely audible, "Reed sends her regards." Charlotte spun, but the woman was gone. Only the echo of heels on marble remained. Garza appeared beside her, eyes wide. "What did she say?" Charlotte shook her head slowly. "Nothing that changes the truth. Reed may still be alive, but Simon's free in a way she'll never understand." Months passed. Snow melted into spring. Charlotte received a letter every week. Handwritten, folded with precision. "I see them every night. Not the ones I lost, the ones I didn't know I saved. Every cut I made to survive was also a cut in the chain that held me. I keep thinking about what you said, that mercy isn't clean. Maybe it doesn't have to be. Tell Garza the data drive changed everything. They're still uncovering clinics. Some were inside legitimate hospitals. The world is listening now." And one letter without signature, only a single line. "If the hand that heals can also destroy, then maybe redemption isn't found in what we do, but in what we refuse to become." Charlotte read it at dawn, sunlight spilling through her kitchen window, the sound of church bells faint across town. 6 months later, Charlotte visited the facility. Simon looked older but steadier, anchored. They sat across a glass partition. "I had a dream," he said quietly. "I was back in the OR, but this time there was no patient, just the light. I realized I wasn't trying to fix someone. I was trying to forgive myself." Charlotte smiled faintly. "And did you?" He nodded once. "Almost." The guard signal time was up. Simon stood, pressing his hand against the glass. Charlotte mirrored it. For the first time since 2012, she felt warmth in the space between them instead of loss. Months later, headlines would announce that the Aegis Global trials had ended in hundreds of convictions. Whistleblowers stepped forward, citing the surgeon's testimony as their reason for speaking. The black market collapsed temporarily, its operations scattered. Garza joined the World Health Ethics Board. Charlotte returned to Concord Hospital, teaching young doctors not just anatomy, but accountability. And in the quiet hours of night, she sometimes stood in or room 7, looking up at the light panel where Simon's note had once been hidden. She'd whisper into the sterile air, "Justice isn't always light. Sometimes it's the shadow that follows it. The machines around her would hum, steady as a heartbeat, and she'd imagine that somewhere. Even behind concrete walls, Simon could hear it. It was early spring in New Hampshire. The snow had melted into gray puddles, and the world was slowly learning how to breathe again. Charlotte stood outside Concord Hospital, staring at the banner fluttering in the breeze. Medical Ethics Symposium, Healing the Healers. She had been invited as a keynote speaker, not as the surgeon's widow, not as the victim's advocate, but as Dr. Charlotte Alcott, anesthesiologist, teacher, and survivor. Her reflection in the hospital's glass door startled her. The lines on her face were new, carved by years of worry and sleepless nights, but there was something else now: strength. The kind that comes when loss stops being a wound and becomes a map. The auditorium was filled with doctors, students, and reporters. The stage lights felt like surgical lamps, hot and revealing. She took a breath. "When I was younger," she began, "I thought medicine was about control, mastering anatomy, mastering outcome. But control is an illusion. The real test of medicine begins when you have none." She paused, scanning the faces in front of her. "My husband, Dr. Simon Alcott, was forced to use his gift in a place where compassion was currency. For 5 years, he fought not just for survival, but for the soul of our profession. And even now, he's still fighting, not with a scalpel, but with truth." The room was silent. Every heartbeat in the audience felt like an echo. "We can build machines that breathe for the body," she said, voice soft but unwavering. "But who will build something that breathes for the conscience?" She closed her notes and stepped away from the podium. The applause rose slowly, then thundered, not for her alone, but for everyone who had survived something unspeakable and chosen to heal anyway. Hundreds of miles away, Simon sat by a barred window in his correctional facility, sunlight spilling across the floor. He was thinner now, but his eyes were clear. In his hands, a notebook, half filled with sketches, diagrams, and lines of thought. He wrote, "Confinement is a strange kind of surgery. You open yourself up, cut out what doesn't belong, and hope the wound closes cleaner than before." On the small desk beside him sat a radio. A guard had let him keep it, part of a rehabilitation program. That morning, the local news covered Charlotte's symposium. He listened silently, head bowed, a faint smile on his lips when her voice came through the static. He whispered to no one, "Still saving lives, Char. Even mine." That evening, Garza arrived at Charlotte's house carrying a sealed envelope stamped with the Department of Justice seal. "They're releasing him," Garza said quietly. "Reduced sentence. 6 years off for cooperation and testimony." Charlotte's hand trembled as she tore it open. The words blurred as she read, "In recognition of substantial assistance in dismantling the Aegis Global Trafficking Network, Dr. Simon Alcott is hereby granted parole effective immediately." She sank into a chair, laughing and crying at the same time. "He's coming home." Garza smiled faintly. "Home might not be the same, Charlotte." "I know," she said, clutching the letter to her chest. "But neither are we." It was raining when Simon stepped out of the facility gates. No reporters, no cameras, no noise, just Charlotte waiting by the car. She held an umbrella, though the wind blew rain sideways. He paused, staring at her as if afraid she might vanish. "You waited." She smiled through tears. 5 years the first time, 2 the second. "I think I'm getting good at it." He laughed softly, the sound catching in his throat. "You shouldn't have." "I wanted to." They stood for a long time under the rain. No words, just the quiet ache of recognition. He looked older, wearier, but alive. When she finally took his hand, it was warm again. Weeks later, they returned to the ruins of the Aegis compound in Reynosa, now seized by international authorities. Vines crawled across its walls, the once gleaming logo half buried in dust. Simon stood where the operating theater had been. "It feels smaller now," he said. Charlotte glanced around. "Because it's empty." He nodded slowly. "For years, I thought this place owned me, but maybe it was just another kind of patient. one that needed to die before anyone could live. She looked at him. Then let's make sure it never heals. They walked together toward the exit, leaving the ghosts behind. Outside, children played soccer on the old runway, laughter echoing where screams once lived. Months passed. Simon joined the Global Medical Accountability Initiative, a coalition dedicated to tracking illegal organ networks and rebuilding ethical oversight in humanitarian aid. His name appeared again in medical journals, not as a surgeon, but as a whistleblower and ethicist. The irony wasn't lost on him. "They're letting a sinner write the new commandments," he joked once. Charlotte replied, "Maybe that's the only way they'll mean something." Together, they traveled to conferences, spoke in universities, and helped establish new guidelines for surgical transparency. For the first time in years, Simon's hands were steady, not because he operated again, but because he no longer had to. One night, Simon dreamt he was back in the operating room, the same sterile light, the same hum of monitors. But there was no patient, only his own reflection on the glass. In the dream, he spoke aloud, "I'm sorry," and his reflection answered, "You already were." He woke before dawn, breathing hard, and found Charlotte beside him, still asleep. For a long moment, he just watched her, the quiet rise and fall of her chest, the sound of rain tapping the window, the kind of ordinary peace he thought he'd never deserve. He whispered into the darkness, "Maybe that's what redemption sounds like." Months later, a journalist from The Atlantic interviewed him for a feature titled, "The Surgeon Who Exposed the Trade." "Do you consider yourself forgiven?" the journalist asked. Simon thought for a long time before answering. "I don't think forgiveness is something you earn," he said. "It's something that keeps you alive long enough to try." "And Dr. Reed?" the journalist pressed. "If she's still alive, what would you say to her?" He looked out the window. "Nothing. Some people need silence more than answers." The article would go on to inspire a global movement called Hands That Heal, encouraging transparency and ethics in volunteer medicine. It spread across 20 countries in 2 years. A year later, Charlotte and Simon walked along the same road where they first met again, the one outside San Antonio Medical Center. The rain fell softly, like memory replaying itself without sound. Charlotte looked up. "Strange, isn't it? How the rain used to mean pain." Simon smiled faintly. "Now it just means the sky remembers." They stood there for a while, letting the rain soak through their clothes. No more running, no more hiding. Just two people who had been broken and rebuilt differently. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Charlotte reached for his hand. "Do you ever wonder what it was all for?" she asked. Simon looked at her, eyes steady, voice calm. "To prove that even in the darkest place, a heartbeat can still choose to heal." And as the rain fell harder, washing the world clean, their silhouettes faded into the gray horizon. Two souls who had bled for truth, now finally learning to live again. It was 2022. 5 years had passed since the exposure of Aegis Global Health, and the world had begun to forget, or perhaps more accurately, to look away. The headlines had faded. The courtrooms had emptied. The politicians had moved on to new causes. But for those who had lived it, the doctors, the patients, the survivors, the story never ended. Simon knew that better than anyone. He sat in his small office at the new Humanitarian Ethics Institute, flipping through a stack of letters. Each was handwritten, stamped from somewhere far away. Jakarta, Lagos, Manila, Kiev. All from medical workers who had once been trapped in versions of the same machine that had consumed him. He kept every letter, every story, every confession. On his desk was a single question, written in his own handwriting. "How do you teach morality to a system that profits from pain?" He stared at it for a long time. The question had no answer. But maybe the act of asking was its own kind of healing. Charlotte entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "You're reading them again," she said softly. Simon smiled faintly. "They remind me that it wasn't for nothing." She sat across from him. "It wasn't. They're changing policies, rewriting medical codes. The Aegis expose rewired the entire humanitarian system." Simon's gaze lingered on one letter from a nurse in Dhaka. She had written, We stopped a shipment last month. We told them no more. Because of your story, we knew it was wrong. He set it down carefully. That one keeps me alive, he murmured. Charlotte reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. Then let it keep you living, too. 3 weeks later, Garza arrived at their home unannounced. Her expression was tense. You need to see this. She placed a folder on the table. Satellite photos, intercepted communications, and a name printed on the last page. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Charlotte's voice went cold. She's alive. Garza nodded. Interpol tracked a new humanitarian front in Southeast Asia, the Ascend Foundation. Same model, same supply routes, same ghost donors. And the board is headed by someone calling herself Dr. Eve Renault. Simon exhaled slowly. Reed reborn. Garza continued. They've moved underground, Bangkok, Phnom Penh, maybe Manila. Different continent. Same playbook. Charlotte's eyes darkened. Then we finish what we started. That night, Simon sat by the window long after Charlotte had gone to bed. The rain outside blurred the city lights into veins of gold and gray. He thought about returning to that world, the one filled with secrecy, danger, and surgical ghosts. Garza's words replayed in his mind. She's alive. He could feel the scalpel in his hand again. The hum of the ventilator, the soft beep of a monitor marking another life measured in seconds. He whispered into the dark, If I go back, I might not come home again. Charlotte's voice came from behind him. Then don't go back alone. He turned. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, gaze steady. If you're going after Reed, I'm going with you. We didn't survive all that to become ghosts now. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. Then we go together. 2 months later, they landed in Bangkok under the guise of a research delegation. Garza had arranged the contacts, local journalists, underground activists, and a young Thai medical intern named Niren who claimed to have escaped an Ascend Foundation clinic. They met him in a crowded night market. The noise of vendors and neon signs cloaked their conversation. She is there, Niren whispered, under the name Renault. They work in the outskirts near Ayutthaya. They say they are saving refugees, but they take organs. Same as before. Simon's voice was calm, but his jaw tightened. How many? Dozens, Niren said. Mostly people who can't pay for treatment. They disappear. No one asks. Garza looked at Simon. This time, we don't just expose them. We dismantle them. Days later, Simon and Charlotte entered the Ascend compound disguised as potential donors for a medical outreach project. The air smelled of jasmine and disinfectant, the scent of paradise trying to cover its rot. And then she appeared. Dr. Evelyn Reed, or Eve Renault now, descended the marble staircase in a white suit, smiling like an angel sculpted out of calculation. Dr. Alcott, she said, her accent softened, her eyes sharper than ever. I was wondering when you'd come. Simon froze. You knew we'd find you. She shrugged. I left breadcrumbs. You always were predictable. Chasing ghosts, chasing redemption. Charlotte's voice cut through the air. You call this redemption? You're still cutting up the poor and selling them to the rich. Reed tilted her head. You say that like it's new. The world's been doing that for centuries. I just made it efficient. Simon stepped forward, voice low but burning. You once said business keeps people alive. Now I know what you meant. It keeps you alive, no matter who dies for it. Reed smiled faintly. You could have joined me, Simon. You had the hands, the brilliance. You still do. He shook his head. I had the hands, yes, but not the heart. Reed sighed. Then you'll die for your morality. Again. Before he could speak, alarms blared through the building. Garza's team had breached the lower floors. The sting operation was in motion. Reed's smile didn't falter. Always the hero. Then she vanished into the chaos. Gunfire erupted outside. Agents poured through the corridors. Staff scattered like startled birds. Simon grabbed Charlotte's hand as they ran down the stairwell toward the surgical wing. The rooms were filled with patients, unconscious, hooked to machines. Victims mid-procedure. Charlotte rushed to disconnect the nearest woman from N4. She's sedated, not stabilized. Garza's voice crackled over the radio. Explosives found in the lower wing. Evacuate now. Reed's voice echoed over the intercom, smooth as silk. You can't dismantle what you don't understand, Simon. Cut off one vein, another grows. The world wants what I offer. You just give it a prettier name, medicine. Simon looked up at the ceiling speaker, anger burning behind his calm. Then let the world see what it costs. He pressed the emergency broadcast key on the security console, routing the live feed from every camera to the global humanitarian network. Within minutes, the entire compound's hidden horrors were streaming live across the world. Operating rooms, storage units, the numbered donors, everything. Reed screamed over the intercom. You fool! You just destroyed everything. Simon whispered, Exactly. Hours later, the Ascend Foundation collapsed under the weight of international outrage. Arrests swept across 3 continents. Donations vanished overnight. The UN froze assets worth billions. But Reed disappeared again, no body, no trace. Some said she died in the blast that ripped through the basement when Garza's team detonated the power grid. Others claimed she fled through the river tunnels and resurfaced somewhere in Europe. Simon didn't care anymore. He'd stopped chasing ghosts. He'd learned that evil didn't die. It just changed its name. Months later, back in Boston, Simon spoke before a panel at Harvard Medical School. The room was filled with young doctors, journalists, and activists. He began simply, Every time we touch a patient, we hold a life that doesn't belong to us. The question isn't can we save them? The question is why do we want to? Because that answer, not our tools, defines whether we're healers or harvesters. A hush fell over the room. Even the air seemed to listen. He closed with one line that would later be quoted across the world. The pulse of morality isn't found in the heart. It's in the hands that decide what to do with it. That night, Simon found a letter slipped under his hotel door. No address, no signature, just a single sheet of paper. You can stop the harvest, Simon, but you can't stop demand. One day, you'll understand that mercy is just another transaction. ER. He folded it quietly, walked to the balcony, and held it over a candle. The flame caught quickly, devouring the words. Charlotte came out behind him. Was it her? He nodded once. Probably. She watched the ashes drift into the night. Does it ever end? Simon looked at the stars. No, he said softly. But now the world knows where to look. Autumn leaves drifted across the courtyard of Concord Medical University. A new generation of doctors filled the halls, unaware that the world they inherited had once been bathed in silence and blood. In a quiet corner of the campus stood a bronze statue, a pair of hands holding a beating heart cast in glass. Beneath it, the inscription read, In memory of those who healed in the dark, Dr. Simon and Dr. Charlotte Alcott. The year was 2032. Inside the university's lecture hall, students gathered for a course titled The Ethics of Healing, From Aegis to Ascend. The professor, a woman in her 40s with calm eyes and a voice that carried both weight and gentleness, began her lecture. Her name was Dr. Niren Anyawat, the same young Thai intern who once helped Simon and Charlotte dismantle Ascend. She spoke softly. They taught us that healing isn't just about saving a life. It's about protecting what makes life sacred. And they paid for that lesson with everything they had. The class fell silent. Every face listened. Outside, the wind carried the faint echo of rain, the same sound that had followed their story since the beginning. Weeks earlier, Niren had received a parcel from a private archive in Geneva. Inside were Simon's notebooks, hundreds of handwritten pages cataloging his years after the trial. She spent nights reading them under a single lamp, tracing the mind of a man who had been both savior and sinner. The last entry was dated 2028. I've come to believe redemption isn't a moment. It's maintenance, like suturing a wound that never quite closes. Every day you check the stitches. Every day you stop the bleeding. And maybe that's enough. She closed the notebook gently, whispering, Maybe it is. 5 years before that final entry, Charlotte had visited Simon's grave for the first time since the ceremony. It was a small plot beneath a willow tree overlooking the Merrimack River. No cameras, no crowd, just her and the sound of water. She knelt beside the stone, running her fingers over his name. Dr. Simon Alcott, 1975 to 2027. The hand that heals must also have the courage to let go. Charlotte's hair had turned silver, her posture still graceful but slower now. She placed a folded paper on the grass, a letter she had written but never sent. You once said the world needed more doctors who could see the soul before the symptom. I see them now, Simon. In every young surgeon, every student, every volunteer who chooses compassion over convenience. Your name became more than a scandal. It became a promise. She sat there until dusk, watching the river darken. When she finally rose, she whispered, "Rest, love." The world learned. Later that same year, Charlotte received a package in the mail. No return address, only a wax seal marked with a serpent and a wing, the old symbol of Aegis. Inside was a flash drive and a note. "For your archives," from someone who once believed in monsters. The drive contained footage, drone clips of a small hospital being built in Cambodia. The sign outside read, "The Reed Foundation for Medical Restoration." But the staff listed under it were all verified humanitarian doctors. The funding legitimate, and the foundation's founder was listed as deceased. Charlotte stared at the screen, her breath catching. For the first time, she didn't know whether to feel fear or hope. She whispered, "Did you finally stop running, Evelyn?" No one would ever know for sure. The following decade saw a quiet revolution in medicine. Whistleblower networks flourished. Ethical auditing became mandatory for global medical missions. Surgeons were trained not only in anatomy but in empathy, how to see the invisible cost behind every operation. Students called it the Alcott Doctrine. Charlotte never asked for her name to be attached, but she couldn't stop them. It wasn't pride she felt, it was peace. The kind that comes when your suffering finally teaches the world something worth remembering. At her retirement ceremony, she said one final thing to her students. If you ever find yourself in a room where compassion feels like weakness, stay there. That's the only room where medicine still means something. They gave her a standing ovation. But when she left the hall, she only smiled faintly, whispering to herself, "He would have said it better." Years later, as the world moved on, a storm rolled over the Merrimack again. A soft, steady rain, the kind that carries memory. Charlotte, now in her late 80s, sat by the window of her small cottage, watching the river. On her lap lay the same folded note Simon had written years ago. "No one can take what is done in love and make it evil forever." Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the willow tree outside, Simon's grave beneath it, the bronze plaque gleaming wet in the rain. She closed her eyes and smiled. "You were right, Simon. Even monsters can leave mercy behind." Her breathing slowed. The rain softened. The river whispered its endless song. And when the nurse entered hours later, Charlotte was still smiling, the note resting on her chest. The last echo of a story that began with loss and ended in grace. Years after their passing, a global conference of surgeons would open with a quote etched on the screen in golden letters. "The pulse of morality isn't in the heart. It's in the hands that choose what to do with it." Dr. Simon Alcott, The Moral Pulse Papers, 2025. As the applause faded, the lights dimmed, and the audience watched archival footage. Charlotte and Simon, younger, side by side, giving an interview at the World Medical Ethics Summit years before his death. Charlotte had said then, "We didn't set out to be heroes. We just refused to forget." Simon had added quietly, "And sometimes that's enough." The screen went dark. The room was silent. And somewhere in that silence, beneath the hum of fluorescent lights and the slow rhythm of 1,000 beating hearts, the world remembered. He vanished as a surgeon, but returned as a reminder that the greatest surgery isn't on the body, it's on the conscience. Some wounds heal, others teach, and the name they found inside that patient still beats in the heart of every doctor who remembers why they began. If you find this story helpful, kindly subscribe to our channel Storyline Chronicles for more mystery, disappearances, and cold cases.